Welcome back to Hot Issues, and as I indicated, we are looking at the issues involved in the contest between Ghana and La Côte d'Ivoire over offshore oil resources. Who determines national boundaries? When national boundaries have been determined, do they remain like that forever? What is the legal position? What are the chances of Ghana winning the case it has sent to UN arbitration and so on? These are some of the issues we are going to discuss today. And as I indicated, we are very privileged to have with us in the studio somebody who understands it all. Indeed, is Mr. Kwame Mfodwo, who has done international law, who has taught international law, and who has worked with a couple of governments on the environment and issues relating to law of the sea and so on. You're welcome to the studio, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pratt.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Kwesi Pratt.
Now, Kwame, what are the issues involved? What are the claims and counterclaims?
Okay. Viewers may have seen the Attorney General of the Republic of Ghana, Mrs. Marietta Brew, appear upon basically setting out for the public Ghana's claim, but also more importantly, the fact that Ghana has initiated arbitration against La Côte d'Ivoire, with respect to settlement of our maritime boundary in the West, because we also have maritime boundary issues to be sorted out in the East as well. I think that the entire week has been taken up. It's been one of the hot issues as we've gone along. Now, the claim, or rather the situation, involves more than just petroleum, because what Ghana is asking the arbitral tribunal to determine is what's called a single maritime boundary line between the two countries, which line will regulate relations between the two countries with respect to all uses of the sea. So it's extracting petroleum, catching fish, managing and controlling environmental issues at sea, matters of navigation. All these would come under, or all would fall within the framework of what the maritime boundary line would help the two countries regulate between them. It will be a line which in some sense demarcates the area of jurisdiction between the two, or rather the areas of jurisdiction which fall under the authority of the two countries. It is not necessarily, however, an automatically deep dividing line, because you can draw a line to help you sort out your responsibilities, but that line doesn't prevent you from cooperating with each other. Sometimes when you draw a line separating things, it's to help define so you can better work together. So in a sense, certainly the Ghana government expects that cooperation with Côte d'Ivoire is actually going to improve, because we have clarity about who does what, where, and to some degree what belongs to whom. At the moment, we don't have clarity, and in situations where there's an absence of clarity, confusion actually reigns and cooperation is difficult. So I would like to emphasize this. It actually is, in a sense, a dividing line, but it's not meant to divide. It's meant to demarcate, so that afterwards cooperation will actually improve in quality. I think it's important.
But what is the difficulty in achieving clarity? I mean, these countries have been independent for more than 50 years. And if they've been countries, certainly their borders ought to be known.
Okay. Well, all right. So basically, land boundaries and land borders there's still difficulties in terms of land boundaries and land borders being more precisely physically demarcated, trees being grown along the lines dividing the countries and so on. But there's a general principle in African politics and international law as applied in the African context that as much as possible the boundaries that were left to us by the colonial masters, those boundaries are regarded as not being subject to change as you basically receive them that's how you're supposed to keep them. There's an international law principle, which uti possidetis, which I'm not going to do the Latin law bit because sometimes it obscures understanding. But as you more or less receive them, so you should keep them. Now, as far as the sea is concerned, the sea space, maritime regions, maritime territory, as far as that is concerned, you actually don't, between and amongst the various African countries, and a lot of countries around the world, you actually don't have established maritime boundaries for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is simply because what's called the limits that you can actually claim from your coastline out into the sea have been progressively expanding. So you could claim a territorial sea of 3 nautical miles, then the idea was you could do 6, then you could do 12, and then beyond that, there's a zone called the exclusive economic zone. Exclusive economic zone, territorial sea. And it's important, I'll try and explain the difference. Territorial sea is actually part of your territory. The exclusive economic zone belongs to you, and you can use it exclusively for economic activities, but other countries can use it for other uses of the sea. So it belongs to you for the purpose of taking petroleum out of that area. It belongs to Ghana for the purposes of taking fish out of that area. But anybody who wants to pass a vessel through, a ship, can navigate through your exclusive economic zone, and you can't actually stop them unless they're doing something really, really bad, like smuggling drugs and so on and so forth. But a ship passing through your exclusive economic zone cannot stop to fish, because that activity is economically exclusive to only Ghana. They have to get a license. So to just recapitulate, territorial sea belongs completely to you, to Ghana. The exclusive economic zone, other people can use it subject to your permission. Now this is important because effectively what Ghana and Ivory Coast are to some degree having a tussle over is we've both got territorial seas and we've both got exclusive economic zones. And the question is, what is the dividing line between, on the one hand, our territorial sea, and on the other hand, the exclusive economic zone, which is the next zone after the territorial sea? So we are looking, and if you permit me, we are looking to see the line which basically divides, I hope viewers can see this, the line which basically divides these two sets of territories which both countries have. Now to go a little bit further, as a general rule, when geographers are drawing maps of both land and maritime territories, they use what's called an equidistance line, a line whose, if you like, constituent points at every single point on that line, you'd be able to find an equivalent reference point going back to the land territory. And I'll explain equidistance a little bit more clearly in a minute. But basically, the geographers use an equidistance line. So when you look at a map, if you open a book and you look at a map, you will see a line between Ghana and Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. That line, however, in international law is not agreed. The geographers have, as a matter of convention, just drawn an equidistance line. So people have had an impression for a very long time that the maritime boundary between Ghana and Ivory Coast is settled in international law. No, it is not. It is rather that international law says, despite whatever the geographers might draw, the two countries have to sit down and negotiate where their final line is going to be. Now, that same line that the geographers have drawn on the map for the last 50 years, in practice, has been used by Ivory Coast and Ghana as if it was an agreed line. In international law terms, it's a de facto line, a line which is used as a matter of fact, a line which has become customary practice, a line which, in fact, we can say to them, you have respected this with us for so long, why are you suddenly changing your mind? Now, their response, which is a justified response, is, yes, that line's been there for the last 50 years, but it is not a de jure line. It is not a line which, as a matter of international law, we have both jointly agreed is the line. And that's really, if you like, the avenue that they are using to make this claim that they are making, They're saying, yes, we have practiced and respected this line for fisheries, for petroleum, for whatever, but we've not actually sat down, negotiated, and signed a firm agreement. It's really important for people to understand this, if you like, this avenue that they're using to claim. And they're justified in making this point because we've not actually, right up until today, managed to de jure, as a matter of law, agree where the line should be. Now, to the substance of their position, they basically have said, yes, you prefer the equidistance line, but we think another method is applicable, and they first offered a method called the meridian approach, which basically they said what we should do is choose a line of longitude, latitude, longitude. We should choose a line of longitude and use that as the boundary. Our response was no, our position is equidistance. They came back and said, okay, we will drop meridian, we'll do meridian 2. And again, our response was no, our position is equidistance. Then they came again with bisector 1, a bisector which is at an angle which cuts into our maritime territory. We responded again, no, our position is equidistance. Then they came with bisector 2. You can see how the negotiations have been progressing over the last 6 years or so, since 2008. This has actually been the substance of the situation. They've been changing position to try and get the best possible outcome for themselves. And as a matter of protecting Ghana's national interest, we have consistently said no, our position is equidistance. 50 years or so we've been doing it. It is the preferred method in international law, and that is the position that we are going to be sticking by. So we've not shifted our position in these negotiations. Our position has been very clear because that is the position that is strongest and firmest in the national interest. So this is the way things have been for quite some time. They've been expecting us to shift, they've been expecting us to move, but we've remained firm. And in those circumstances, after a while, you basically probably just go to court. They are not prepared to shift. We are not prepared to shift. So we've basically said we'll go to not even court, really, arbitration. We've basically said let somebody else do for us what we've not been able to do for ourselves. And we expect, for a variety of reasons which I'll explain later, we expect that the arbitral tribunal will basically confirm that the line is properly where we say it should be, and then that will be a final and binding decision.
But from what you're saying, it would appear that it's Ghana that has not been shifting at all.
Well, Ghana doesn't have to shift. There's a number of reasons why Ghana doesn't have to shift. One, the customary practice stuff. There's an international law principle called estoppel, which is also present in domestic legal law. It basically says that if you give somebody whom you are in a relationship with the impression that you think A to be the case, you are estopped. You are stopped, literally you're stopped from moving to a position in which you now say B is the case. I'll repeat that. You've given somebody the impression for a very long period of time that A is the case. Then suddenly you seek to shift position and say now that B is the case. The legal position is that you are stopped from actually taking up your new position, especially where, in reliance on the impression that you originally gave with respect to A, that person relying on you has done all sorts of things which would basically lead to them being in detriment if you suddenly shift to take up position B. To be practical, on the basis of the Ivorians accepting the line for the last 50 years, Ghana has basically entered into a number of petroleum concessions in which we have given territory, we've licensed territory out to people right up to the equidistance line, and we will suffer detriment if the position changes. So really, we have basically taken the position that this is not a position that we are prepared to shift from, because we'll be in significant detriment if we change
Couldn't
that
we have a
position.
situation where there are a multiplicity of principles and so on guiding the drawing of the line? And are we not just hanging on one of those principles?
Well, we happen to be lucky, shall we say. We happen to be lucky both legally and geographically, because for something like maybe 30, 40 years, there were many competing principles as to how you do this drawing of the boundary line, of the maritime boundary line. And in a number of cases which more or less grew in number over the last 6-7 years, the International Court of Justice, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and independent freestanding arbitral tribunals of the sort that we are setting up, all of them started coalescing around a particular technical procedure, which is basically, one, the judges draw a provisional equidistance line, line. In our case, we are lucky. The provisional equidistance line that they will draw in the arbitral case that we've initiated will be virtually the same as our current equidistance line, because that's where the equidistance line is. So they'll start with our line, and then they will ask themselves whether there is anything which requires them to shift or adjust that line, whether to the left or the right. Now, fortunately again for us, our coastline between, the relevant coastline between us and Ivory Coast is actually really quite straight in character. There are no major islands. The coast doesn't suddenly twist and turn. Like, for example, Nigeria and Cameroon, there's a twist and turn and so on. We don't have any of that. We have a perfectly straight coastline, apart from Cape 3 Points. And again, we're lucky. Cape 3 Points begins to have a legal geographical impact on the equidistance line after 270 nautical miles. Remember, I was talking about 200 nautical mile exclusive zone. Yeah. So everything in our exclusive economic zone falls nicely where it should be, because the equidistance line begins to, if you like, jut too much into Ivorian territory at 270 nautical miles. So we'll keep our 12-mile territorial sea as it is, and we'll also keep our 200 nautical mile territorial sea as it is. Things might start getting a bit complicated after 270 nautical, but that actually does not involve any territory that we are claiming. So, that's the basis. It has been suggested that the Ghana side is really quite confident in its position, and part of the reason that we are confident in our position is simply that I guess we've been lucky. Some people say this country is blessed. Maybe I might agree with them on this particular issue, that the legal stuff actually really all the ducks line up in a row very nicely in our favor.
I'm sure that you're very familiar with the contours of our western border. And our western border looks particularly interesting. It starts from the north, and it's close to a straight line all the way to the Brown-Harford region, and then there's a bulge into La Côte d'Ivoire. And then there's a cave into Ghana, and then there's the Cape 3 Points, is it?
Well, no, actually, go on, though.
Yeah. So, what are the implications of this kind of contour? This particular case?
No, that's fine, and it's a good point that you raise. You see, because interestingly enough, the Ivorians actually took the position that we should make maritime adjustments because there are certain issues on land which look disproportional, or we should balance out at sea certain things which perhaps needed to be balanced out on land. Now, as far as the International Law of Maritime Boundary Determination is concerned, it follows principles and methods, geometrical principles actually, starting from points on land out into the sea. The land boundary and lines that you've drawn do not impact in any way whatsoever on what you do going out to sea. So whatever problems you might have on land, you don't resolve them at sea. Do you see?
So the point is that
okay, please.
You draw the line from your territory as it touches the sea.
Yes. What's called the land terminus point. And maybe I can attempt to explain the equidistance and the bisector a little bit more at this point. So basically, what we have agreed on one thing in the entire negotiations. Really, there's only one thing we agreed on: that there will be a land boundary point called border post 55 between us and Côte d'Ivoire, which is the point from which we would take whatever line out into the sea. So we did agree something, right? BP 55, we jointly agreed, and we went and we jointly surveyed it. Everybody took their instruments out. We checked that nobody had moved it and so on, and it's fine. We all agree it's fine. Now, from BP 55, from Ghana's point of view, the equidistance line would go more or less to the right, towards, to the right towards Ivory Coast. And the way that it is drawn is you basically, let me try and get you to visualize points A, B, and C on a line going out to sea from going out into maritime water from this land terminus point. Now, point A should be 30 kilometers from a point in the Ivory Coast and 30 kilometers from a point in Ghana. Point B should be 60 kilometers from a point in Ivory Coast and 60 kilometers from a point in Ghana. Point C should be 100. Do you see? You get the logic. So every single point on that line must be able to be referred to an equidistance point in the reference, the reference points in the and the reference points from which you then do the line are called base points, basically. So part of what we've been doing is we've been exchanging base points and so on and so forth to allow us to draw the equidistance line. Should we agree that equidistance? So we've been doing stuff which exchanges stuff. We exchange information. Should we finally agree, and then very quickly we can technically do the line drawing that's required. But in a sense, the exchange of base points has been perhaps a bit of a futile exercise, because they would never accept equidistance and we would never shift from equidistance. So we've given them our points, they've given us their points, and we've had a lot of discussion about those for just in case we finally agree.